All right, so let's kick this off. Welcome in, everyone. My name is Jeff Belisario. I'm the Executive Director of the Bay Area Council's Economic Institute. Really excited to moderate today's panel. We've got an all-star lineup talking about everything: hospitality, travel, tourism, restaurants, all of the things that we want to be doing right now, but unfortunately, given what's going on with COVID-19, we cannot. And I kind of just wanted to give a brief agenda of how this will all roll out here in the next hour. We have four amazing panelists. I'll introduce all of them together. Each of them will kind of give a 2 or 3 minute overview of their industry and what they're seeing. I'll have a couple of questions that I have pre-prepared on the hospitality industry and what our experts are seeing. And then the key part of this is the webinar doesn't work all that well unless we get questions from the audience. So at the bottom of your screen, and I'll remind everyone as we go, please use that Q&A function to enter questions, and I'll kind of pick through them and bucket them and get those out to our experts. So let me first do some quick introductions of our four panelists here. First, we'll have Carolyn Batetta. She's the president and CEO of Visit California. She's also on the executive committee of World Travel and Tourism Council. We also have Kevin Carroll. He's the president and CEO of the Hotel Council of San Francisco. He also chairs the San Francisco Workforce Investment Board. We have John Albrecht. He's the manager of aviation, marketing, and communications for the Oakland International Airport. He's also an airline industry veteran, previously serving in management roles for the Reno Tahoe Airport and for Aloha Airlines. And last but not least, we have Lori Thomas. She's the executive director of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association. She's also the owner of Nice Ventures. So she actually owns a couple of restaurants in San Francisco. So very excited for today's panel, and thank you all for joining us. So as I mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Bay Area Council's Economic Institute, and I would not be doing my job if I didn't provide a couple of data points to start this conversation out. So we're going to look at leisure and hospitality. So we're talking here restaurants, hotels, arts and recreation. That sector has lost 200,000 jobs in the 9-county Bay Area compared to its levels in January. So that's about half of that sector's total employment, and it's 1/3 of the region's total job loss. So when you look across sectors, this has really been the one that's been impacted most. We're very excited to talk today about what those sectors are seeing and how they are working their way through this crisis and out of this crisis. So let me first turn it over to Carolyn Batetta. And Carolyn, I'd love you to kick it off just with some thoughts from the state level, thinking through what the impacts have been so far and kind of what you're seeing from the Visit California perspective as you think about marketing the state for travel and tourism as it opens up.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with all of you via Zoom today. I think it's a little cooler in the Bay Area than here in the Sacramento area. So I hope you're enjoying double digits, not the triple digits that we're experiencing a little further inland. Anyway, just a little bit about Visit California. First and foremost, for those that are a little bit less familiar, we're basically the first tourism improvement district. It's a 501c6 nonprofit. We have 21,000 investors, many of which are all of you that are on the phone with us today that powers our program and our board and the insights that we get from our incredible investor community. Ironically, Visit California was founded because of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake and that crisis that brought us into it, because obviously when that happened, that seems like 100 years ago, but when it happened, the entire world that felt that California just kind of fell off into the ocean. And unfortunately, we had no way of recovering because there were no dollars to really kind of correct that narrative. So hard lessons learned, but we are in a much better place today to really amplify the coming open for business messaging. I'll start with some very grim notes. The industry statewide has been completely devastated. Ironically, just last year, 2019, we just got our economic impact report, and we'd had enjoyed 10 years of growing visitor spending in the state, topping out at $144.9 billion last year. The coronavirus has not been kind to hospitality, and that has been swiftly erased. We're projected to lose $72 billion in this state this year. Just by the end of May, we'll lose 613,000 jobs in travel and hospitality directly. In San Francisco alone, and I'm sure Kevin will talk about this, the city projects a 59% drop in hotel tax revenue for the next fiscal year. And sales tax from restaurants and bars will drop 60% just in this quarter. So it has been very, very rough and grim for all of us in hospitality. We are funded by investors, so we've had to downsize our organization, eliminating 55% of staff, taking pay cuts, et cetera, to right-size ourselves just to get ready for the long-term recovery. And I'm sure we'll be talking about recovery soon. Response, right now we're in what we call a pause phase because people, for the most part or exclusively, are not allowed to travel outside of their counties. But we wanted to make sure we maintain top of mind awareness for our 33 million followers, both here in California, nationally, and around the globe, to make sure that when the time is right, they will consider traveling to California. So we've been completely active on social media, releasing content, 2 iconic pieces of content, our video we did to thank our first responders, as well as a video we released a few weeks ago entitled Dream With Us, that's done very well. It's had a combined reach of over 630,000 views and 20,000 in actual engagement. The other thing we've done is recognized with Lori on the phone, you'll hear about this, is the restaurants. We know if tourism's at the breakwater, the restaurants are right up front. It's been terrible. It's so much part of the Bay Area brand, but the whole California brand in terms of being an iconic culinary destination. So we started a campaign called Takeout Tuesdays. It's a hashtag campaign, Takeout Tuesdays. It's done very, very well. We have 100 partners to support all these local restaurants, 1.4 million reach. Even our partners in Michelin have jumped in to support this effort. And we see that as having long-term legs, particularly for the near-term future. And I can talk, Jeff, later if you want about our recovery. We don't see it as a light switch. It's really a dimmer switch looking for green shoots and what we do in terms of our phased-in launch of our, starting with our Calling All Californians campaign soon.
Great. And we'll definitely get into questions on the recovery. And I'd say that I'm definitely supporting Takeout Tuesday, also Takeout Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. It's been very nice, especially here in the East Bay, supporting the local businesses and ensuring that we're out still spending money as best we can. Let me turn next to John Albrecht at the Oakland International Airport. If you're going to be traveling to California, you're potentially going to do it on an airplane. So John, we'd love to hear more about what's happening at the airport. For those of us that have not traveled, what does it look like today? What have the impacts been, and what are you seeing within the airport and then within the airlines that use the airport?
Sure. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. I have to say, I've been in the business for 37 years, and there has been nothing like this ever before. And I think that's an important point to remember. We're in uncharted territory, and so you can look to other data points of crisis in the industry, 9/11, economic recessions, et cetera, but they're not quite like this. So it's really difficult for us to sort of figure out what the new normal is going to be. For those of you that don't know, Oakland International Airport is located in the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area. We have the distinction of being the airport closest to most of the local population, closest to most of the employers, and we also offer superb access to all of the region's tourism venues. This has been, in a word, we're a 93-year-old airport, the oldest in the Bay Area, and this has been devastating. In April, we saw a 96% drop in our traffic numbers. And so we were committed to keeping the airport open through this process, and that's really the result of the indefatigable efforts of many of my coworkers who have come in day after day at front line at the airport to keep the flights that were continuing to operating and getting people home. You may have seen in the news, Oakland Airport played an integral role in the rescue flights for those passengers that were stranded on the Grand Princess. And we activated our emergency command center for almost 2 weeks while that process rolled out. And that was sort of our initiation to this whole crisis. Since then, we're working very closely with the airlines. There's been quite a bit of flux in airline schedules. The CARES Act has allowed some airlines to consolidate at other airports, but we're very fortunate that we have Southwest Airlines with their largest base in California at Oakland Airport. And so we are working, really closely with them to rebuild things at Oakland. And while the results are grim, I think we're encouraged that we're starting to see what I would define as green shoots of life. Passenger numbers we hit 3,000 the other day, which just to give you some context there, it's been as low as 400. Our average busy day is 15,000, so we're still quite a ways away. I do think that we've hit rock bottom, and the team has now moved into a phase of how are we going to welcome people back to the airport and maintain social distancing, continuously cleaning the environment so that it's safe, so that there's a perception of safety, and then working also with the TSA and working closely with our national organization, Airports Council International, on any new measures that are put into place for air travelers. We have a couple of airlines at Oakland that are taking passenger temperatures prior to boarding the flights. So that's something that we're seeing, and we're wondering if that's going to become more commonplace. We are seeing that the airlines are beginning to rebuild their schedules. For example, Southwest today loaded a schedule that'll get us back up over 100 flights a day, which is very, very good to see. They too are seeing, they actually went booking positive a couple weeks ago, where they saw more bookings than cancellations for the first time in 90 days. So that's encouraging news. I think part of the issue is, you have to have people to be comfortable in the airport, but they also have to be comfortable on the airliner. And so you see the airlines introducing things like the Southwest Promise, Alaska Above and Beyond Clean, and Volaris has their own system, Hawaiian Airlines. And so we're working really closely with them so that we're echoing the measures that they're taking. One of the factors that continues to affect us is we're a major gateway to the Hawaiian Islands, and with 3 carriers flying to all 4 islands. And the 14-day quarantine for all arriving passengers from the mainland just has killed that business. And so while Southwest is continuing a couple of flights a day there on a essential service basis, we are looking forward to that quarantine being relaxed, and Hawaii opening up will be key to our business. So in terms of recovery, we do think it's time for people to shift from the California dreaming of traveling to again booking those trips. And so on Monday, we will launch a major Bay-wide campaign to encourage people to once again fly the East Bay way.
Great. Thank you so much. We'll look forward to that on Monday. I would also mention now, we don't have any questions in the Q&A yet, but just a reminder to the 95 folks participating, please use that Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to get your questions in, and we'll get to them in the second half of the program here. Now, next let me turn to Kevin Carroll, the Hotel Council of San Francisco. Kevin, we'd love to know more about your membership and what's happening within hotels, and a little bit of the what has happened and what you kind of foresee in the future in terms of hotels.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me on the call. First of all, the Hotel Council is like Visit California, is a nonprofit 501c6 organization. We represent the voice of the industry for the hotel industry. We advocate on behalf of the industry, and we also educate our members. A quick background, we have about 215 hotels in San Francisco. That's 34,000 hotel rooms. We have 25,000 jobs just in hotels, but our hotels support over 106,000 jobs, and that's both in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. So when we're busy, the others are busy as well. And hotels in San Francisco generate and create an economic activity of over $11 billion. And we are the largest industry of taxes to the city of $450 million in taxes. And obviously that's going to be changing with what's happening with our occupancy. As far as COVID-19, I equate to what happened to our industry as a car going 60 miles an hour and then coming to a complete stop. We had occupancies in our hotels of over probably close to 85%. And then with the shelter in place and the restrictions, we went down to now that if a hotel is open, it would probably have occupancy in the single digits as part of it. And the majority of our hotels are temporarily closed in San Francisco. But over 15,000 of our employees, we estimate, are either furloughed or laid off as a result. And as you can imagine, when our business is busier, more employees are working. And so now that we're virtually not having visitors at all, and we're in a situation where our employees aren't working, and that's incredibly important and worrisome for us as well. We've worked closely with the city partners on some hotels are open and contracting with the city for first responders and vulnerable populations, and that's been something that's been that we've been working closely with the city to connect our hotels with the city. I think there's three things that are going to be critical for us as an industry for our recovery. First of all, our guests really knowing and understanding the cleaning guidelines that our hotels are putting into place. And what we did as an industry, and the council led this, is we pulled together a clean guidelines task force several months ago as it started, and they've been working closely on pulling together all the medical, the CDC, all the recommendations from different organizations and from our hotel partners and brands, and putting together a document that'll be used and be available for our hotel industry to be able to use and really look at how our cleaning protocols, what we do for our visitors, for our employees, and everything, so that we can really help our guests understand that we are leading on the cleaning side of it coming out of COVID as part of it. The second part of that is really educating our members. And so the council will be leading trainings and webinars for our hotels to learn more about the guidelines, to learn more and to help train as well as part of it. We think that's going to be critical as people are traveling and they're hearing more about guidelines, both with the airlines, with other places they're going to, but they need to understand and feel comfortable with the hotels as well. So that's going to be one of the first priorities and one of our criticals to recovery. The second is that our street situation, we will need to make sure that our streets are clean and safe. And it's something that was an issue going into COVID, and coming out of it, it's going to be even more important. So we're part of we've led a Clean Safe 365 organization that we put together. There's multiple organizations that are working with the city to ensure that the situations on our streets can be improved, so that our visitors and our guests and our employees can work and visit in a clean and safe environment. So that's going to be critical for us as well. And the third thing that's going to be critical is really the guests returning and the demand. So right now, everybody's wondering, when will the demand come back? John was talking about the airport. Carolyn was talking about bringing people into the state, bringing to us. For us, as I mentioned, when we're busy, everyone around us gets busy. So if our hotel rooms are full, the restaurants around us are full, and the visitor attractions are busy. And that's what our members are asking. That's what we're trying to find out. When will we start to see that demand back? We have three major customers. We have the tourism customer, we have business travelers, and we have convention travelers. And right now, all three of those are heavily impacted as not traveling, and we're going to need to see that. We'll be ready for it. We want to make sure it happens, and we know it will, but it's going to be a long recovery. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. I'm already seeing questions coming in the Q&A. So to all four panelists, prepare yourself. Everyone wants to know when reopening happens. So gaze into the crystal ball. I'll give you a heads up on that question. But let's next turn to Lori Thomas. Restaurants have been at the front lines, significant job loss. There's small businesses as well, struggles there. So you just kind of give us the state of the industry and kind of what you're seeing in the restaurant space.
Yes, well, thank you for having me, and I'm really honored to be involved with this group, because as Kevin just stated, we really all need each other to recover. And so I think the more that we can work together to address all of our issues, the better off we're going to be. So I'm Lori Thomas, the Executive Director of the GGRA. The GGRA is Golden Gate Restaurant Association. We primarily have members from San Francisco, but it's open to the surrounding communities as well. We have a few East Bay members, and we're certainly taking anybody that wants to be a member now. We, in San Francisco, there are about 3,600, 3,700 restaurants by the last count. These are brick and mortar restaurants. Of course, we have other food vendors, mobile food trucks and such, but about 3,650 restaurants. It's an industry that employs roughly 60,000 workers just in San Francisco City and County alone. I saw the number coming out of the federal number that there have been 40 million unemployment claims, of which a quarter of those are restaurants. So just to give you an overall, because we're sort of playing at the federal level, state level, and local level here, there's about 10 million restaurant workers, 10 to 11 million, and then you count the suppliers on top of that, the food suppliers and such. And it is quite a few employees that were affected just in the restaurant industry nationally, and then of course in San Francisco, 60,000 workers. We in the Restaurant Association, it's been around for 84 years. It was founded in 1936. I've been running restaurants in the city since 2000. So I not only am an owner, but I recently in January took over the more of the executive director policy role. And so I can bring sort of the realities to the world and then try to help make public policy work. It's been a really rough go. Everybody knows that we in the city did an amazing job of closing the city down the end of February, essentially. I know the official date was March 16th, but 2 days after Mayor Breed's announcement, we personally, all of my restaurants and a lot of our colleagues saw sales drop by 40% that Thursday, 48 hours after the emergency shelter in place took effect. And then we can track data and see it going completely down until the closure date for dine-in, which was the evening of March 16th or effective midnight March 17th. My 2 restaurants are completely closed. There are quite a few restaurants. We don't have the exact numbers. We're trying to get that from the Department of Health that are still open for takeout and delivery. We did a poll with the Golden Gate Restaurant Association a couple weeks ago. We only reached about 10% of the overall restaurants. Those that replied represented about 420 separate locations. And of those, half had closed and half were open. But then we think out of that group, about 60 to 70% were open for takeout and delivery. The unfortunate thing is you lose money just doing takeout and delivery. We're fortunate in the city to have a delivery cap on the commissions charged by a lot of the third-party delivery apps, and that has really helped people doing takeout and delivery to try to break even. So that has been helpful. What else can I say? There's a lot of things that we're concerned about, the well-being, the financial well-being of the restaurant industry. Obviously, as Kevin stated and Caroline stated, a lot of our business, certainly the restaurants around Moscone Center and downtown, come from tourism and from convention business. We are desperately needing that to come back, and we understand the health issues, but that's affecting many, many restaurants that aren't sure they're going to be able to reopen in that area until December or January, because they just don't anticipate the business. The neighborhood restaurants, more of them are hopeful about reopening. I want to just say the shared spaces announcement 2 days ago by Mayor Breed, and that we've all been advocating with the city task force is amazing. That can help restaurants to extend their outside seating in numerous different ways. We don't have to get into the details. We don't have it all worked out, but that could be very helpful in terms of revitalizing the city and letting restaurants add capacity. We anticipate that when dine-in happens, and we can come back to those dates in a minute, nobody has the exact dates, that we'll be seeing 30 to 40% capacity if we are going to adhere to the social distancing guidelines we've all seen of 6 feet. I want to reiterate that we don't have final guidelines from the city. We'll look to the city we're trying to have input into that and working with all the departments. If we were to have partitions or other ways of providing safety between, we might be able to increase that capacity. So we're hopeful on that. Restaurants can't survive at 30% capacity. I can show you my numbers. We would bleed cash. We are all very hopeful. I have breaking news out of the House that a fix to the PPP, which is the Payroll Protection Plan, just happened. It just passed. That is Representative Phillips' bill. It passed by 417 to 1 in the House with 13 no votes. So that shows a broad bipartisan support for it. Now we have to have it go to the Senate. But this was the bill that was going to help the restaurants live, that had a very short forgiveness program. It had an 8-week forgiveness of the labor costs and stuff. Otherwise, it would turn into a loan. So again, it's complicated, but if we can get that fixed, that will really increase the opportunity and probability that restaurants are going to be able to survive financially.
Great.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff going on, but that's where we're at right now.
Perfect. Well, that's a piece of good news, and I think I want to turn now, if there is good news, to potentially more good news. So, like, how do we think about reopening? And I want to start back at the top with Carolyn. And again, a reminder on the Q&A, please get your questions in. I'm working through them as we speak. But wanted to talk, Carolyn, a little bit about when we do get back into a reopen situation, how do you think about marketing travel, and particularly how you think about demand and like the psychology around travel and how we tackle that issue in California?
Absolutely. You know, we're looking at reopening under basically 3 conditions or 3 premises, starting with, and this has to do with consumer sentiment. I mean, that's everything for us in terms of who we target, why we target, what kind of messages we send out. And it's all based on consumer sentiment, which we're measuring on a weekly basis, frankly, Jeff. So we're looking at, from a sentiment perspective, the state of the health crisis, the state of the economic crisis, and then, of course, as I said, consumer sentiment. So I left off saying it's going to be a rather jagged recovery. We are not looking at this V-shaped curve that everybody was talking about. I keep calling it a Nike swish because there was this precipitous decline, and there's going to be a slow rise out of it. And that is based on those 3 scenarios, frankly. So in terms of marketing, you know, we're looking at people wanting to travel closer to home. And we have, you know, laid out kind of a stairway to recovery, which starts with where we're at right now, which is frankly recreation or staycations. Consumers will migrate to nearcations, and then ultimately staycations, and then of course back to our new normal of being vacations. And so we're mapping messages and campaigns around that stairway to recovery. With regard to the staycations, when that travel advisory is lifted, and I'm seeing all the questions in the queue about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we'll start with a campaign an in-state campaign called Calling All Californians. We have not done in-state marketing since 9/11. Our job on behalf of the industry is to actually bring dollars in to California. So we do long haul domestic and international marketing principally. So this is a major pivot for us to go back and launch a major brand campaign encouraging Californians to travel California, help the communities recover, and help your fellow Californians. So there's not only the inspiration around all the embarrassment of riches we have in California, but kind of a pledge to your fellow Californians to look to California first, because not only does it give you enjoyment and a release, but it actually helps bring us all back. 72% of our travel visitation is actually Californians traveling within state. So we can do a lot to help ourselves. Unlike other destinations, Las Vegas is Las Vegas, and it's within Nevada. I mean, that's one city. New York has New York City. We are so fortunate to have a travel economy that hits all 50 counties, frankly. So that's where we'll start as we go into creeping outside of California, our Western drive markets. we'll switch that call to action to call California's Calling. And then finally, next spring, we're looking at a national campaign, brand new launch of All Dreams Always Welcome in California. So that's kind of that migration path that we're looking at in terms of the timing, mapping to consumer sentiment.
Great. Thank you for that. And awesome to hear the path forward. The last question, this will be like when that path actually occurs. So I'll throw that out there now. But lots of questions coming in on just safety, both on the customer side, but also for workers. So maybe I'll turn to John at the airport first here. Question on the top 3 concerns that passengers are having coming back to the airport, and what the airport and the airlines are doing to overcome some of those concerns. And you spoke about it a little bit, but maybe tell us a little bit more about the airlines and the airport and some of the safety measures you have in place.
So I think it's begun with our campaign for social distancing within the airport. People generally need to be reminded that they need to stand 6 feet away from each other. And in the airport, it's just a. Of course, I'm getting a phone call right in the middle of this. So people need to be reminded to. I think it should go to voicemail in just a second. I apologize. So people need to be reminded to stay 6 feet away from one another, and we have signs throughout the terminal building. We also have decals on the floor, and then certain things have been done with the stanchion. I think we're moving very quickly to a touchless experience at the TSA checkpoint, so that this exchange of your ID and things like that can all be done without actually passing the document back and forth. The other thing that I think becomes key for travelers is to complete as much of the process as you can prior to leaving home. So check yourself in, get your boarding pass. If you can, print your bag tag, so that when you get to the airport, you can not have to stand in line 6 feet apart. So I think that's something that's going to help. Again, I think I talked about the continuous cleaning that's going on at the airport. These misting machines or foggers that we're seeing everywhere, I think are becoming ubiquitous. I know just today we got 4 new machines from Clorox, Oakland company Clorox, and they are being used throughout the terminal to accomplish that process. Once on board, I think the one thing that's important for everyone to keep in mind is that there's this antiquated notion that the cabin air is recirculated, and so if somebody is not feeling well and they're sick, your chances of getting the virus are increased. Actually, that's exactly untrue. 97% of the air in the cabin is new at a maximum of 3 minutes, usually 2 to 3 minutes. And all of the air that does get recirculated goes through a HEPA filter that screens out 99-point-something% of the virus. So cabin air is actually really clean, and that's something that IATA and various airlines, I know Spirit Airlines in Oakland has made a particular effort to get the word out there, because there is this notion that once you're on board, you're breathing all this contaminated air. So we'll be communicating that as well.
Great. Let me turn to Kevin on same type of question, just in terms of what some of your members are doing in terms of cleaning and ensuring safety within hotels.
Yes, and for us, it starts with our employees. So the guidelines that we're working with and that are being put together for it include notification for employees, signage for employees, education of our employees, so that when they have a guest, asking them questions. So I think it starts with our employees. It's for everything from when they're arriving to work to when they're at work, what they're doing during the day as part of it, and then also our guest experience. So like John mentioned, already hotels were moving to more of a keyless entry, and I think there's even more of an attention on technology that will allow hotels, if a key's printed for you, that it's not being touched by someone else, that you have the ability to check in online, you have the ability to check in on an app when you arrive, how the social distancing is in place within the hotel, and then in your room, the protocols for the room cleaning, for when things aren't brought to your rooms, things like that. I think for the industry, there's a lot of things that'll be changing as a result of this. The other thing is, we do a lot of business within our hotels and what we would call self-contained businesses. So when you come to a hotel, you may be staying in the hotel and you're attending a conference in the hotel as well. So how do all the new guidelines that are in place, how are they set up when you're coming in and you're coming into a meeting, or when you're going from a meeting to another meeting within the same hotel? So I think that's why the guidelines and the work and the attention that we're spending on those are critical, because those are the types of questions people will want, and to make sure that they feel comfortable working in a hotel or staying in a hotel.
Perfect, thank you. And let's move to Lori on a similar question on safety in restaurants, but also you mentioned the 30 to 40% capacity not really being viable for long-term industry health. So and the key question for the industry is, how do you balance safety and revenues, right? So how are you thinking about that within your restaurants, and how are your association members thinking about that issue?
So yeah, so I can see some of the questions too, and I do want to say that that's a big issue financially, and I've said it before. Unfortunately, businesses aren't the federal government, and we can't run at a deficit. So once businesses, even if they reopen, run at a deficit, run through the money, then they'll be forced to close. And that's what we're trying to prevent happening. And as a business owner myself, I've seen that happen personally before. And so it's a real concern. If you don't have the revenues, the costs are too high, you can't make it work. So what are we advocating for? Obviously, reopening in a safe way for workers and employees, just echoing what Kevin just said, is what we're looking at as well. But that's why we were very supportive early on, at the end of April, early May, with trying to talk to everybody about how do we utilize our outside spaces, which are, I'm not a doctor, but I've heard are safer, because the air is safer than being in a confined space, an indoor space. So hopefully we can activate more outdoor seating. And a lot of us have outside seating in San Francisco. Unfortunately, it's not LA. The weather's going to be a bit of a concern, but we want to activate the outside seating, move to people that don't seat outside, because the more customers that you can bring in, the higher probability that you can make it financially, and that you can rehire more people. So if we're only through social distancing able to use a third or maybe 40% of the space in the restaurant, so instead of 100 customers, you could only seat 30 customers, right? Then we can only really bring back 30% of your employees, because you can't bring back all your employees and only have a third of the revenue. And we're all business people and policy people. We understand that. So that was why we were so supportive of how do we activate our sidewalks, our parking spaces, some of our streets, maybe part of our park and rec, things like that, where we can do what Europe has always done super well, and have a live outside area that can financially help the restaurants hire more people and survive. And we would still do it in a safe way possible. There's going to be, things that have to get worked out in the next couple of weeks, but I think it's very, very important that we have this opportunity.
Perfect. And I see a lot of questions coming in on furloughs and layoffs and rehiring. And maybe I'll turn to Kevin here, just in thinking through with your members, what are the types of things that need to happen to bring people back to work? What are the benchmarks that hotels are looking at? Kind of give us a sense of what a return to work timeline could look like within the hotel.
Yeah, it's one of the questions. We're talking about this daily, and I don't have a very succinct answer for you, because a lot of it depends on the shelter in place and the demand for people coming back. And I think for us, we need to make sure that we understand what all the regulations are and everything that's being controlled either at the state or locally or even federally. And then for us, people are asking, when will the hotels be able to come back? And unfortunately, the hotels are asking themselves that now. Is it July? Is it August? When would they be able to, some possibly in June, but I think it's, like everyone's mentioned, it's a longer recovery. And if we don't have people coming into the area, whether it's local or traveling in through the airports, we won't have the demand. And one of the biggest questions any business would be asking themselves, especially hotels and restaurants, is if you're going to open, you want to be able to stay open. and it would be a bad situation to open and then have to close down again. So you're bringing people back and then not being able to keep them. And I think that's really for us a big question. And it's something, you know, we don't have a clear date or time because there's so many other elements that factor into this about when people can come back. Our goal, we want our employees back. We want the industry strong. And we're going to have to be patient as to where that's going to happen. When.
And I think that's one of the issues. The Bay Area Council has been thinking a lot about how do you balance the health and safety and public health impacts versus the need to have some economic growth happening again or bring the economy back to a certain extent. So maybe I'll turn to Carolyn here, and a question just on dealing with the state and dealing with the various regions and kind of policy around reopening. One thing we had talked about was if every county is doing something differently, that kind of California road trip becomes much more difficult. So how do you think about maybe a longer term impact here? If every county is doing something slightly differently, how do you communicate that to the public?
Yeah, I think we're in the most challenging situation as we go forward, as we're seeing various openings happening. So we're being very clear in terms of kind of well, first I want to say strategically, we've really switched from being a brand-led organization with a lower funnel social level application. And we have flipped that now where we are socially led with brand inspired, because we have to be lower funnel to be able to communicate to consumers where the opportunities for travel are and what destinations are accepting travel, frankly, from, you know, in just a few weeks when we migrate into stage 3 for the next several months, to your point. So it's really turned our organization and our skill set, it's flipped over, and we're now, you know, re-engineering how we communicate to visitors, just to your point, over the next 4 months. Obviously, at some point, we'll all be open, but what you're talking about is this interim gap, and we're seeing it every day in the headlines of who's open or who wants to receive visitors, and we're trying to, as a statewide platform, facilitate that. I'll say also, part of this pause phase, I've been communicating and interfacing with the governor's office on a weekly basis. It was multiple times a day as we were in that free fall. And one of the things we have done, and Kevin Carroll was involved with this, is getting our trade association CEOs on the phone with the governor's office or GoBiz on a weekly basis so that we can coordinate messaging around this. So those are a couple of things that we're doing behind the scenes as we're getting into this opening phase.
Great. Let me next turn to Lori. There's a question for you on the capacity of restaurants, and asking really like what capacity level in theory could work, but maybe another way of phrasing it is like, what type of innovations are you seeing where there can be revenue bumps without necessarily having 100% capacity within the restaurant? We've mentioned the streets. Are there other things that restaurants are doing or could do to improve that revenue?
So let me first address the 30% capacity. You know, unfortunately, maybe even 60-70% capacity is not going to work, and that's why we all have to run our own numbers, and there'll be significant decreases in the percentage of employment you'll be able to bring back if you're not seeing it offset by some sort of a relief program to help you bring people back, like the PPP. So 30% capacity certainly won't work. Why I was advocating, and the GGRA was advocating for outside spaces, is because more is better. And if you can seat another 10 to 25%, let's say, by just utilizing the parking spaces and some of the outside seating, allowing for, you know, ingress, egress, all of the different concerns, certainly that is going to be helpful. Now, at a broader level, if we can, and this will be, I think, at a supervisor district by district decision, and that's what we're seeing everybody's approach to this is. If you're going to do more of the slow streets or the closed streets or a combined public area, say Noe Valley Square, for example. I live in Noe Valley, and that's one of the things that maybe could be utilized. Then you will start to see even more incremental capacity gains. So there's no set equation here. This isn't cut and dried. We have to experience what do we have available. We'll have to experiment with what works and what doesn't work. In terms of different revenue streams, a lot of folks have done an excellent job of the meal kits. I think a lot of you guys have seen that. So taking and pivoting from producing dinners completely done to sort of what we used to see with some of the meal kit companies that have been trying to do that before. Now some of the restaurants taking that on. So that's one area. I think you're going to see, I kind of hate to say this here, I might get crucified for this. I think you are going to see some price increases on the menus. There's a lot of costs, of fixed costs in the restaurants. There's leases, the cleaning costs are going to go up. And I didn't even bring up the personal protective equipment issues and the costs, and the Bay Area Council's been helpful enough to try to work with me on some solutions. But there are a lot of incremental costs that this new world that we live in is going to require. Cleaning, electrostatic cleaning, paying your cleaning companies, masks, wipes, sanitizer. I mean, I don't even want to run the numbers. So we have to be somewhat optimistic or we're never going to reopen, but there are a lot of costs. And so the more seating we can do, the higher the probability that the restaurant will be able to continue to operate. Because that's my big concern, what Kevin said. I personally don't want to open and then have to close 2 months later and declare bankruptcy because the numbers just don't work. Nobody wants to do that.
And then a question here for John. When we think about the U.S. or even internationally, are airports working together to have similar standards? Will there be inconsistencies for travelers depending on airports they're going to and from? And how does Oakland think about that potential issue?
It's a good question, and it's an area that we've put a lot of thought into. Again, working with Airports Council International, several of us are involved in different committees. I'm involved in the Recovery and Resiliency Task Force, and to your point, that's exactly what we're focusing on, is making the experience as consistent as possible. We already saw early days people arriving into Oakland and didn't have face masks, and face masks are required in Alameda County. So we made sure between the airline and the airport that we had a supply to provide them if needed. But I think there's a lot of emphasis on that so that you don't leave Boise, for instance, and have one experience and then depart Oakland and have another. And it is an important point. It is good that at Oakland we have a resiliency task force that's been meets every Friday and has been doing so for the last couple of months. And we're really tackling these issues one by one, starting with the making people feel comfortable to come back to the airport, the cleanliness, the experience with the airline, and then their return.
Great. Well, let's begin to close it down a little bit. I want to do a rapid fire here. So I have 2 questions, and if there are any questions that panelists see in the Q&A, feel free to address that here, but maybe I'll give each of you 2 minutes. We've talked a lot about the timeline. We've talked about VU, Nike Swoosh. What's kind of the recovery timeline for your industry, if you had a crystal ball? And then what positives are out there? I mean, this is unprecedented. It's hard to find positives, but what do you see as a positive for your industry? I'm going to start with Kevin. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock here. Lightning round.
Oh, okay, great. I love it. So I think for our industry, the positive for us is we want to try and get our employees back as soon as we can. And I think that's through both our cleaning standards and working with our employees on that and our guests. And I think for us, the timeline, boy, I wish I had a crystal ball. If I did, this would probably be the time. I think we will see in the next month or 2 hotels that are starting to open up, or the ones that have been closed, and it probably more toward the later side of that. And I think for us as an industry, it's the new world that we're in. And one thing I will always say about hoteliers and the people that work in hotels, they are incredibly resilient. They are masters at plan B. and finding different ways. As when you think about it, a hotel is like a small city, and quite often they have virtually everything a city would have. You have security, you have laundry, you have this. And for them to look at what's happening in the hotels, how do they make sure that our employees and our guests are safe and being able to return to work and be there. I'm really encouraged by just the fact that our hotel industry has such a can-do attitude with how they can make things happen. And I think for me, when I look at everything that's happening and all the changes, the hotels, will have to embrace that, and they will, and find creative ways to make it happen. And I look forward to that.
Perfect. And within 2 minutes, even better. Let's move to Lori in the lightning round. So we're looking for your potential timeline to getting back to where we were, if that's even possible, and then positives that are silver linings that have come from this.
Okay, so yes, I wish I had a crystal ball too. I think we'll start to see some movement. And again, San Francisco's in its own orbit, right? We're going to start to see some movement to outside seating, I think in the next month or so. And I'm hopeful that dine-in will be sometime in that time frame, but it might be a little bit longer. You will see the neighborhood restaurants certainly opening first. That will happen as soon as I think it's allowed, for sure. I think somebody had asked earlier, I think you will start to see restaurants in the airport start to reopen as the travel picks up. We're already seeing some of that. Some of my friends are reopening. I think, unfortunately, for down by Moscone, the financial district, and more of our Union Square district, you're going to probably see restaurants holding off to open, particularly the bigger ones, until the January timeframe. There's concern about when tech will come back and when there'll be more people working in that area, and of course when our conventions can come back. So that's going to be a longer time frame, and I think everybody's really hopeful that the vaccine will happen sooner rather than later. So what's been positive? Well, it's been amazing to see all of our restaurant communities come together, not only with San Francisco, with the Bay Area Hospitality Coalition, with the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, but with the Independent Restaurant Coalition that I've been lucky enough to been asked to be a part of the leadership group with that. That's the really lobbying for change in Washington. It's been amazing to talk to all kinds of people. It's been phenomenal to work with all of our partners here, of course, and throughout the business area. That's been amazing. And then even working with the city, there's been so many great relationships that I have made over the past 3 months that I never would have thought, working across all of the different supervisor groups and to the OEWD and different folks in the mayor's office and the task force, the City Economic Recovery Task Force is a big goal, but it's starting to be effective, and that's also been a real positive move, I think.
Great, and I know there's a question in the queue on coordination among all of your groups, and I know that that's happening through many of these task forces, both at the local level but at the state level as well. Let's go to the airport. John, 2 minutes on the clock on kind of airline recovery timeline and any positives that you see.
So unfortunately, the person that called had the answer and I didn't pick up. So, we're seeing capacity come back to the market in July and August, and whether the planes will be full or not, we really truly don't know. I think it's setting up to be more of a swoosh than a V. And the good that's come through it, the thing that really stands out for me is just the amount of kindness and humanity that I'm seeing in the airport again, that perhaps was missing prior to all of this. And I hope it's something, Californians have we're known for that. And I think it's come out and we're seeing ourselves at our best through this crisis. And I hope a lot of that carries through.
Perfect. And let's finish where we started then with Carolyn, with the state view, just in terms of your thinking on timeline for recovery and positives that have come out of this crisis.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, well, I mentioned it. I don't see us getting back to, say, 2019 levels for at least 24 to 36 months or beyond, because it is a stair step, and a lot of it has to do with flight load factors and demands, as John would attest to. So that's just going to take a while, particularly with international infrastructure. On the positives, though, you know, just from a consumer perspective, certainly pent-up demand will be good for business when the time is right and we can travel. That'll be helpful, wind at our backs. From the consumer perspective, again, just new ways to serve the customer. Our businesses are so grateful and appreciative of the business when the time is right, that they're going to have enhanced service for sure. And we're going to see a lot of new products, experiences, and better ways for trip planning that have come out of this, you know, and when we go into new normal. So I am optimistic that we have forever changed the way we're doing business, and the consumer is going to benefit as well.
Great. Well, I think that's it. Fantastic. I think that's a good spot to end it. What a fantastic conversation. Really great insights from Kevin, Lori, Carolyn, and John. I think we'd love to have you all back maybe in 6 to 12 months, and we'll have some more positive news to share. Because I think everyone in the audience, and maybe me the most, just needs to get out and travel and go to restaurants and get into a hotel. So we're all excited for when that day comes, and we really appreciate your time. Let me close by mentioning a couple things. The Bay Area Council has a COVID-19 update website. I would point the audience members to that for updates, both on where the economy is and kind of where Bay Area Council members see things headed. I'd also point you to bayareaeconomy.org for more updates on the economic side. And with that, I think we'll close it down. So thank you everyone for joining, and especially thank you to all the panelists for a fantastic discussion. Have a great day.
Thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.